Banks and credit unions may look the same to a consumer driving down the street, but there are some fundamental differences that are actually quite important to understand. Howard Headley is the president and CEO of the Utah Bankers Association. And Howard, last time you were here, we were talking about something that I found fascinating, but we didn't have time to get into it. So I want to go on a deeper dive on this one. This trend where credit unions are buying banks. I would not have assumed that credit unions would be the ones buying banks. I think most people might have just defaulted to say it's the other way around. So what's going on when a credit union buys a bank?
Well, you're right. It's counterintuitive for most people, and the law really doesn't envision this happening. Credit unions, unlike banks, serve a specific group of people, and that's what allows them to make loans that a bank might not be able to make. And that's what helps the poor get access to credit, which was the whole purpose of the credit union movement. In this case, you've got credit unions that have gone beyond that mission. They've expanded beyond that common bond group, and they're serving the general public just like a bank. And because they're tax exempt, that's what's driving the whole thing. You've got a tax exempt institution operating just like a bank, serving the general public, and then you have a bank serving the general public that's paying taxes. And so there's this force that's pulling the bank and the credit union together in an effort to avoid taxation.
Yeah, so it's almost like when they were created, no one envisioned that a credit union with its mission could grow to be so large that it would buy a bank. That's what it sounds like to me anyway.
Right, and the law doesn't envision it happening. And so it's just happening in this vacuum of public policy.
So we should look at this then and say it's not so much the bank wanting to sell to a credit union or a credit union wanting to buy the bank. Which one's the driving force there?
The bank wants to sell to the credit union.
They're the ones that are motivated.
Yeah, because effectively the bankers are the big winners. They can take money that they would have been paying in taxes over the next few years and put that money in their pockets by selling their bank to a credit union.
So that's how they take advantage of the tax exemption.
Exactly. It's clearly not what was intended. Those monies would have gone to our schools and to our roads and to our fire and police departments. But in this case, when a bank sells its bank to a credit union, those profits now become tax exempt, and the credit union can pay the bank more money to buy the bank. If the bank sells to another bank that's going to have to pay taxes, they get a market price. If the bank sells to a credit union, then those profits are tax exempt. The premium from that tax exemption goes into the bankers' pockets.
Okay, so the only thing I don't understand then at the moment is that you're here representing the banks and you're telling me that this is something banks are doing that's probably not a great thing to do. Help me understand that. Why are you calling them out?
Well, we've been talking about this for years, and you're right. I do take heat for this, but it's a principled issue, right? Congress created a tax exemption to help the poor in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Over many years, rich people figured out a way to take advantage of that tax exemption. Small businesses figured out a way to take advantage of that tax exemption, that subsidy. Then big businesses and developers. And bankers have been calling this out for a couple of decades. But if Congress isn't going to do anything to get this tax exemption refocused on the poor, then it's not that big of a surprise that bankers are going to figure out a way to take advantage of the tax exemption.
So to a certain extent, it sounds like it's good for a bank or whoever runs that bank when they sell to the credit union. It's good for the credit union because they get larger, but it's maybe not good for the financial system in general or for banks more broadly speaking.
It's not the way it was meant to be. It obviously, it hurts. It impacts all the other taxpayers because then everybody else has to step up and shoulder the burden. And so that's clearly why Congress never wrote a law saying credit unions can buy banks. They don't want to see taxable entities leave the tax rolls, eroding the tax base the way we pay for our schools.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about that then is I think most people say, well, there's banks and there's credit unions and they don't tend to get along too well. It almost sounds like what you're telling me is, in this case, maybe they do get along too well.
They're getting along a little too well. And people ask me they say, well, why would a credit union do something that would benefit the bank owners like that and take these tax revenues and and benefit the bank owners, well, the credit union executives get some gain out of this too. The bigger their credit union becomes, the more money they get paid. And so buying a bank is absolutely the fastest way a credit union executive can grow their credit union and up their compensation.
Federally, Congress talking about tax reform right now. Why has Congress been so reluctant to do anything about this situation you're talking about with credit unions buying banks? And how does that factor in with what's going on in D.C. right now?
Well, for decades, Marty, I've been involved in this discussion, and Congress just views it as this fight between one big lobby group against another big lobby group, and they try to not make either one mad, right? Because there's all kinds of PAC money and other things at stake, and so they've tried to just not make either side mad. But now that they're engaged in tax reform and they're focused on things like taking taxes off tips or taking taxes off Social Security income, they need money to pay for those things, or just to lower taxes for everybody. And so now Congress is looking at it not in terms of banks and credit unions. They're looking at it as, we want to take the taxes off tips. How do we pay for that? And so when they see a tax exemption out there that's 100 years old and now being exploited by the wealthy and by businesses and even bank owners, they're like, maybe we need to rethink this. We could redeploy this revenue that we're giving up and direct it more directly toward the people we're trying to help.
So are we finally at a point where something's going to get done then?
Maybe.
My crystal ball's as good as yours, right?
Yeah, nobody knows, but I wouldn't bet against it.
Howard Hedley is the president and CEO of the Utah Bankers Association. Thanks for the insight.
Thanks, Marty.